in the legislature. It's important for Great Falls, so Great Falls people are going to be involved in it. So Jane and Bill have been, this is the second time that we've done this, and we will do this throughout the legislative session. So they will talk to us about the city and county bills that are important to us in the legislature, and then we can ask questions. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Bill is the city commissioner and Jane is the county commissioner, for those who don't know.
Should we flip a coin?
Now you go first.
Ah, okay.
I always like to sit to his left.
Well, hey, thanks for those of you that did come out tonight.
Whoa.
So thanks to everybody who did decide to come out tonight. Those of you who know me, I was born and raised on the High Line, and I know Art Dolman will understand this, but we think you're all weenies down here. This is the banana belt compared to where we've lived. And I'm serious about that, truly. Yeah, so you've lived in Hammer, man, let me tell you. That's right, barefoot in the whole 9 yards, you bet. What I want to do, and what Jane would like to do, is take a few minutes, as between the two of us, and just give you some highlights on some important things that are affecting the city and the county and the legislature. As in past sessions, I kind of liken our experiences, to a certain Dickens novel that most of you are familiar with, where you've heard the phrase, "It was the best of times and it was the worst of times." And that quite often is our experience in Helena, and quite often it's more worse times than it is good times. But there have been a few good things happening down there. One, which we've been very pleased about in, I think, both the cities and the counties, but cities more so, is we are making progress on legislation to increase opportunities for affordable housing in our communities. It's an issue everywhere. It's a bigger issue and a greater concern in some places like Bozeman and Missoula, but it's still important here as well. And a bill that Representative Dave Fern from Whitefish had introduced to utilize the coal tax funds as a source to borrow money and then to pay back in so that we're replenishing that principle. It has made it out of the House, and it's now going to the Senate, and it will be considered here relatively shortly. But it will probably, for the first time, make available a lot of additional funding for low and moderate income housing and various types of housing developments. And from that standpoint, we applaud our legislators for looking at that. More on the negative side, though, because there seems to be a lot more of that, at least as it affects us in Great Falls. When we were here the last time, you heard me speak a little bit about the importance of the tax increment financing provisions that we have in our state laws to not only create targeted areas where we can encourage certain kinds of economic development, but we can also use them to identify blighted areas and refurbish them and make them greater like they once were. For example, West Bank here in Great Falls, where you're seeing a lot of wonderful new construction. That was for the most part an industrial zone years ago. It turned out being for the most part a waste dump. And over the last 10 to 12 years, we've done a great job of cleaning it up. And one of the ways we've been able to do that is through tax increment financing. Now, I preface this comment or these comments I'm about to make when I say that in the 2 years prior to this legislative session, we had a group of other elected officials from local communities around the state. We had people who actually administer urban renewal and urban redevelopment programs in other cities as a collective, and we called ourselves the TIF group, and we were under the sponsorship of the Montana League of Cities and Towns. We spent a great deal of time working with legislators on the interim revenue committee that was looking at the tax increment issue. And until the end of last year, we thought we had made tremendous progress educating legislators on both sides of the aisle on how critical a tool this is to both cities and counties in terms of economic development and resolving urban blight. As I say, we were pleased up until the end of last year. But as we found out in prior sessions, the whole subject of tax increment financing, when it gets to the legislature, it's kind of like the game of whack-a-mole. Somebody comes up with a bad idea, you whack that down, and another bad one pops up through another one of the holes. And unfortunately, that's what we've been dealing with this session. There were a couple of relatively bad bills introduced. One, the sponsor walked away from after we persuaded him that it would be harmful. The other one, it took a concerted effort to kill it in a House committee. But a third one made it through the House, and it's now on its way to the Senate. Because of some of our prior work, we've been able to secure amendments to it, which will hopefully mitigate some of the impact. But the point is, we have a lot of work to do with the Senate to avoid it becoming even worse than it is. And another point, unfortunately, one of our own local senators, Senator Hoven, who sat on this interim revenue committee and who we thought had really come to a good understanding of the concept, has another bill potentially floating around, which, had it been in effect in the last couple of years, we would not be able to do any kind of infrastructure improvements in the downtown. We would not have been able to do what we just did for the airport, where we approved infrastructure financing that's going to help construct more, or aid in the construction of more hangars up there and more development up at the airport. And the reason it would have had that impact is Senator Hoven, after spending nearly 2 years on a committee, did not understand that tax increment financing is more than just issuing bond. That's all he thought it was about. And as a result, he was prepared to introduce legislation that would have prohibited us from using money for other kinds of projects. We're working with him. We are trying to get him, Mayor Kelly and some of the rest of us have gone to him. We're trying to get him to understand that what he's talking about is not good for this community. It's not good for other communities around the state. But the sad point again is, no matter how much education we do with these legislators, we have to come back continually and fight these battles over and over and over again. And it's not fun. It's given me more gray hair than I already have. A couple other things too I wanted to mention, and then I'll let Jane have the floor. Cities and counties for several years have relied for part of our financing of local government on what is oftentimes referred to as the Entitlement Program. And it's probably not a great name, but essentially what it is back in 2001, the legislature, in response to a need to find more efficient ways to collect and distribute revenues that were being raised in communities like ours, we came up with a system whereby a lot of specialized little local taxes that most of you never even think about are now all collected and go to the state of Montana and then are returned to cities and counties based on a formula based on the size of our community and some other factors. And these monies are critical. Great Falls alone gets about $7 million in revenue back from that program every fiscal year. If we didn't have those funding sources, we would not be able to provide a lot of essential public services at the level we're providing them right now. We all thought that those monies were sacred because of the understanding back in 2001 that all we were doing is we were simply collecting those localized taxes and returning them back to the communities to do the kinds of things that people expect us to do. Institutional memory is something the legislature doesn't have anymore. And with term limits and with people moving on, you have a new crop of people now who don't remember this compromise. They don't remember this deal. And so they now look at our entitlement funds as a source of funding for other types of programs that were never intended to be financed by this. 2 years ago, they snatched some of our money in the last days of the session for some mental health program funding. And we don't object to that funding for those programs. We don't object to that at all. It's just that that money should have come from another source. Instead, they took it from us, so we didn't have as much money to do some local government funding that we wanted to do for that fiscal year. In this session, they are now seriously talking about taking a lot of those funds and using it to fund the Office of the Public Defender program. Ostensibly on some theory that, well, these local governments are passing all these ordinances that are putting a burden on the OPD program, which is false. is not true. But once again, you have legislators who are acting on the basis of misinformation or no information at all. They see that pot of money there and they want to grab it for other things. So when you hear legislators on both sides of the aisle talk about how they believe in local control and making sure you have the resources in your community to provide the level of public services that you crave here and that you need, quiz them and find out what they've done on some things like this. Because, and Jane is probably has a better memory of this, but my understanding is that when they brought in several of the rural county commissioners to listen to some of the conversation about this proposal to raid the entitlement funds to fund OPD, you had even some of the most conservative rural county commissioners get up and look at legislators and say, you come back to my county and tell me who's going to get fired because I don't have the money this year for the Public Works Department. You tell me who we let go or who the sheriff lets go at the sheriff department because there's not enough money for deputies. That's what happens when you make those kind of decisions down in Helena. And so it's kind of nice to see some of those folks see some of the same problems that we have as urban communities when we deal with the legislature. Last thing I want to talk about is something that has really kind of just sort of flown right under the radar screen. And I will confess that I do have some mixed feelings about this particular issue. But it deals with the issue of guns, particularly handguns. Some of you may be aware that about 2 or 3 years ago, the city of Missoula adopted an ordinance, which they felt they had the authority to do additional background checks for people trying to purchase firearms. Well, that raised a real hullabaloo with gun rights advocates. The Speaker of the House at the time, Austin Knudsen, requested our Attorney General, Tim Fox, to write an Attorney General's opinion about it, and General Fox's office came out with an opinion that said, well, Missoula doesn't have the authority to do that, so you can't do it. And when an Attorney General issues an opinion saying this is our interpretation of the law, then that is the interpretation that is followed unless the court strikes it down. Now, because of the way our state laws are written with respect to gun regulation, a lot of us were wondering if, in fact, it was going to just stay at the level that it was with the AG opinion. Well, the Missoula City Council decided we're going to take it to court, and they did. And a district judge in Missoula several months ago said, no, they do have the authority to enact those kind of limited restrictions and regulations with respect to eventually accessing and owning guns. Well, not to be put down, several legislators, particularly Representative Rieger from Kalispell and Representative Skis from the same area, decided, well, we have to really make it clear that local governments don't have that power. But what they're doing and what they're proposing and what has already passed the Montana House of Representatives is a bill that would go a lot further. Many of you know that communities have had the authority to enact ordinances dealing with the carrying of concealed weapons. They want to take that power away from us. They want to make it possible for people to carry concealed weapons into public buildings and similar places. Now, those of us at the City Commission have heard some complaints in the past from people who say, well, we want to have that right under the current laws to carry our concealed weapons like into the City Commission chambers. Which, and here's where I get conflicted. I'm a gun owner. I have been. I'm from a family of hunters. I'm a gun collector. I'm very proud of that fact. As an attorney, I can read and understand the Second Amendment, the way it's written, and I get that part too. But I guess I was raised in a different culture. And the culture I was raised in is that, weapons were instrumentalities to do other things. You use them to hunt. In a rare instance, you might need it for your own safety. But you were raised with the proposition that when you had a problem, you called the police or you called the sheriff's office. Because we're not skilled enough to know how to use weapons in those difficult situations in which some people seem to think they have the ability or capacity to use them. And so when I hear people say, well, I want to have the right to carry a concealed weapon into a commission meeting, my question is, why? Do you feel unsafe? We have 2 police officers and the police chief or one of the captains in there, all of them who are armed as they are allowed to be, all of them who are experienced and trained in the use of firearms, particularly in very difficult situations. You're not. You may think you are, but you're not. And if somebody decides to get a little cranky at a commission meeting, does that mean you feel you have the right to pull out your firearm and start firing away? This concerns not only local elected officials, it concerns our law enforcement folks as well. Because they don't like environments where people, even if you get a concealed weapons permit, that's well and good, that's great, that's fine. But we've just always recognized, even in Montana for years, there are some places where no weapons are allowed, except in the hands of our experienced law enforcement people. Now, if I was a betting person, and I was raised Methodist, so I'm not, we don't believe in gambling, but I was a betting person, I don't think the governor will sign this. I think he'll veto it. And he'll run some risks, doing it as he, plans his political future. But communities need to start having more conversations about this issue. When you hear people say, well, I have a right to do this, you might want to ask them, well, you might have the right, you might have rights in certain cases, but what is your obligation to the community? What is your obligation to your friends, to your neighbors, to your local elected officials, who may not really cotton to the fact that somebody is coming in there thinking that they have to have a handgun? And I'll conclude this by saying that we had an incident in the city commission chambers about 9 or 10 years ago where an individual walked in and one of the police officers knew he had a handgun on him. And we found out later he tried to argue with the police officer. And he said, well, I have a right to carry a weapon. I have a concealed weapons permit. And the officer told him, yeah, you may have that permit, but you have no right to carry a weapon in here. None. He said, you can either take it back outside and put it in your truck, or I'm going to arrest you here right on the spot. Well, he thought the better of it and took his weapon back to his truck. But knowing that individual like I did and still do, why is he carrying a weapon into a public meeting? Why is anybody doing that? Ask yourself that. Those are the kind of things we have to deal with our legislature today. So, on that cheery note, Commissioner Weber.
Thanks, Bill. All right, thanks, Bill. I don't want to have a concealed weapon in my chambers either, and so I would oppose that too. So what I want to do is point to you at your tables. Every one of you has handouts at your tables, so please grab one of those. I am not going to go over every single bill because some of these are bills that I talked about last month, but I do want to bring forward several new ones. And as Bill has said, it's a continuous process of monitoring what's happening over in Helena and finding out that there are some crazy ideas that are coming out over there, and you need to play shield so that you can kind of brace yourself to defend and oppose some of these. Some of these have slipped through one house though, and they concern me. So, and Bill, I'm gonna welcome you if you wanna add some comments on the first couple that I'm gonna deal with, because Bill and I serve together on the Board of Health. And if anybody knows, the Board of Health in Cascade County, it's our responsibility to protect the citizens of the county from communicable diseases and other things that can create health problems for citizens. So the first one I want to talk about is House Bill 481. And the Board of Health opposes this bill. And I'll tell you what this bill does. There is the Montana Clean Indoor Air Act that has been in effect for some time now. This bill really came about because in Missoula, there was a group of people that created what is called a private social club. It was a smoking club. It happened to be in the very same building as the Missoula Children's Museum. And the Children's Museum, when you have one building, the ventilation system has the smoke going through the building, and it was impacting the children in the museum. The Board of Health took action and told them that they were violating the Clean Indoor Air Act, and this club said, no, it isn't, it's private. And they said, no, it is violating the Clean Indoor Air Act. You are in an enclosed space, and they took it to a judge. And I just want to kind of read what the judge said. He said, even if an entity can rightly claim to be a private club, smoking can still be prohibited within the space it uses if the space otherwise meets the definition. If an enclosed space shares the same indoor air space as a public space, the prohibitions of the Clean Indoor Air Act clearly apply to both spaces. So let me just tell you what this would do. We've got bars in our community that could become card-carrying private social clubs. How many of you would join a social club simply to go someplace and smoke? Nobody's going to do that. They're going to want to have a drink, and they might want to have some snacks. And so that is a clear violation in the minds of the boards of health, because you are actually then risking your servers who have to provide the drinks to those people, or janitors that have to go in and clean up after the day is done and be exposed to that secondhand smoke. And the way this bill is written, it does not specify age either. So a parent could take their child in there and smoke their cigar in the smoking social club private space too. So this is a very bad bill. I put on there who's already voted in favor of it, because I want you to know that many of our own people right here in the community voted in favor of it, but Wendy McCamey voted no. And I sent her an email and thanked her for that. So you need to know these issues on the Clean Indoor Air Act, and I'm going to get to some others with immunizations, seem to be a partisan decision. And I do not think clean indoor air and the ability of people to have clean air should be partisan. So the second one I want to talk to you about is Senate Bill 179. This one is really upsetting to me. This one actually emasculates the boards of health for creating additional clarifying regulations about the Clean Indoor Air Act. So here in Cascade County, and Bill, again, I'm going to welcome you to add to this if you would like. Here in Cascade County, we went through a public process with a board of health where people were able to give us ideas about the definition of an enclosed space and an appropriate smoking shelter. How many of you have been to the city bar? How many of you noticed the smoking shelter at the city bar? It's outside the building, it's separate from the building, and it has 3 walls, and one of those 4th wall is totally open to the air. It is totally legitimate in the eyes of the Board of Health as a smoking shelter. No drinks are served out there, no refreshments, no server has to go out there, and it's totally exposed to the air. We have some bars in our town that have created smoking rooms with louvers and vents on the tops of those, what we're calling enclosed spaces. When it is 20 below zero, do you think those louvers are open? No, those are enclosed spaces. And the Board of Health has gone to court on this issue several times. And I'm going to tell you who we've been against. It's Greg Smith here in our community. And he is associated with a tavern that has one of these spaces. So there are several taverns that have done this. This bill would say that the Board of Health does not have the authority to create those additional regulations, even when we go through the public process of a hearing, like we did here in our case. And you can only do these additional regulations if the city commission or the town council or the county commissioners pass that regulation. So it basically takes away the authority of the Board of Health. So Bill, would you like to comment on that one at all, since you've been involved with us taking this case to court? And before I do that, the other thing that this bill does is it's retroactive. And so because Cascade County's Board of Health is in a lawsuit right now, which we will be taking to the Supreme Court to have it rendered a decision on this issue against Greg Smith, this would make it null and void.
Yeah, I guess the 2 comments I would make, maybe 3, is what you're seeing is you're seeing a legislative response to different attempts by different communities around the state, mostly urban areas, to try and really carry out the full intent of the Montana Clean Indoor Air Act, which includes sometimes having their respective boards of health issue clarifying regulations. Now, of course, here, we had a judge say that, you know, the regulation adopted here was not appropriate. We're challenging that in the Supreme Court. In Yellowstone County, a district court upheld one of their regulations there. And Missoula County and Lewis and Clark County have similar regulations, all of which are at risk. And it's obvious that what's happened is that certain economic interests have decided that we're just going to run to the legislature and try and countermand all of these efforts. Whether or not the governor will agree to that is a whole other issue, but obviously they've realized that their best bet is to go to the legislature and try and prevent this from happening. And this is, as Jane has pointed out, sadly it has become a partisan issue. It's, you know, and Jane will probably say in just a couple of minutes, she'll talk about the anti-vaccine legislation that's there. It's part of this climate, if you will, of where people say, well, we have to have more freedom in our society. People have to have more freedom to do these things. Why should anybody be concerned if I smoke all I want, or I don't get my children vaccinated, or whatever the case may be? And it reminds me of an observation that my mother, as a school teacher, made years ago, when one of her students one time challenged her and her authority and said, well, you know, I really should have the freedom to pretty much do what I want. I'm almost an adult and I understand what I'm doing, and I should have that freedom. And I don't remember what it was. It was something pretty ridiculous, but my mother looked at him and said, if you stop and realize what you've just said that you have the freedom to be an idiot. And that's what we're talking about today, is you're talking about people, you know, they say they want their freedom to do things, but what they don't realize is that their freedom is going to impact somebody else's freedom. And it also doesn't say anything about, you know, what is the general good and what is the common good in our society. And we are losing sight of that conversation overall. And whether it's smoking, whether it's vaccination, lots of other issues, that's what's getting lost in this debate. And as I said, sadly, it's become a partisan issue.
And again, I provided to you who voted in favor of this. You will notice that there is an individual on there that owns a tavern. So, on 10th Avenue South. And I will tell you that this one needs help. This is scheduled for a hearing on March 12th on the House side in local government. And so both of these bills, I'm concerned we're going to have to end up going back to the governor and asking him to veto them. You know, he's not going to veto everything that goes awry. And so I don't know how much power we will have to convince the governor to veto both these bills if they pass through. Okay, the next one I want to, and I want to let you know that those two bills I'm bringing forward to you on behalf of the Board of Health. The next ones I'm bringing forward to you on behalf of the County Commission, and here's a couple that we support that are new. And again, I'm not going to go over the ones that I talked about last month. I just repeated them in the handout for you. But there is Senate Bill 291, and this one is going to help with voter systems and ballot forms so that folks that have accessibility issues will have the same ability as anybody else to do their voting in a polling place. And that just makes sense. And the clerk and recorders support that bill. And so I think it's a good bill. And it has had a hearing in the Senate on Monday. It just had its hearing. So there hasn't been a vote coming out of the committee yet. A couple of the other ones that I want to talk to you about, and I will tell you that the other ones right there on that list we visited about last time. So I'm going to move though to House Bill 299. Jasmine carried this bill for us, and it was her first bill. And I want to tell you, she did a really good job on this. We talked about this. This was removal of the $250,000 cap that we have on loans when we have RSID projects on roads. And she went to bat for us on this, did a really great job. It passed on third reading, 64-36 in the House, and now it's over on the Senate side in the Local Government Committee. And she's just done a really great job. So they've had a reference, but they haven't had a hearing over on the Senate side. I think she's going to be successful with this one all the way through. Those are the ones I just want to talk about on promoting. Well, I will talk to you about the governing the highway encroachments too, 224. This is one Tom Jacobson has been carrying, and this is a bill that just increases the penalty if you close a county road, you encroach on it in some way. It used to be $10 a day. Well, originally Tom wanted $500 a day, And it had to be modified because we could not get the support for that bill, so now it's down to $80 a day, but at least it's better than $10 a day. So we've been supporting that one even as it's been changed. And here's a couple bills that actually the county opposes. I did speak to Jim Larson and Commissioner Briggs about it. I can't get MACO, the Montana Association of County Officials, to take a position on these, but I do know that Joe and Jim oppose these. And this is House Bill 574 and 575. So let me talk about 574 first. What this bill does, this bill actually takes away, when a child becomes in foster care in a home, they really are a ward of the state for DPHHS. And DPHHS wants that foster family to immunize those children because there are some requirements to keep those children safe. This bill, and there is some people who are promoting this bill that say, foster homes, we have more children than we have foster placements for them. They're saying that foster homes that have religious reasons for not immunizing children aren't taking in foster children and licensing themselves as a foster care facility because of their religious practices. Well, I will tell you that they've actually had a study done, and in the last 20 years, there are only 2 potential families that did not license in 20 years.
They must have all spoken today. I listened to that hearing.
Yep, and so that hearing happened yesterday. I will tell you that the boards of health across the state strongly oppose this bill. If any of you have been watching the measles outbreak in the state of Washington, Clark County, where most of those people for religious purposes did not immunize their children against measles, that county, Clark County, has spent over $500,000 on that issue alone. You have to track it, you have to find the source, you have to communicate to other people who had the measles and were your children immunized. It is a nightmare for this community, the county health department. The state itself has actually paid over $614,000, so over $1 million in that state just because of the measles outbreak. That's ridiculous. House Bill 575, again, a crazy bill. This one actually says that daycares don't have to require their employees who are watching over children, nor the children that come to the daycare to get the immunizations. Now if you're familiar with immunizations, newborn infants cannot be immunized because they're too young. They have to wait several months before they can get their pertussis and their diphtheria and their mumps immunizations. And also there are children who legitimately have immuno issues that can never be immunized because it can cause them major problems. What happens is for those children, there is what's called herd immunity. Because all of us have been immunized, those children are not exposed to the disease, so they are safe because of herd immunity. When you don't have herd immunity and those outbreaks begin to happen, we could lose infants and we could lose children who are born with immuno issues. So this is a bill that, both these bills have been proposed by Teresa Manzella out of Hamilton. There are nicknames for Ms. Manzella that I won't say now, but we can talk offline on those. These are bad bills, and we need to really make sure that these don't get pushed through. So those are the ones that I really wanted to let you know. And then on the last page, you will notice that there are 2 new bills that we're dealing with that we haven't taken a position on, but we're watching them. And one of them is House Bill 618, and it's dealing with a way of funding our statewide communications system. And Lewis and Clark County has invested a significant amount of money in a statewide operability communications system for emergencies. And we really don't have a way to sustain that into the future. They're looking at this. I'm not sure that one's going to go very far. And the last one is the gateway option tax for communities like Livingston, which are a little ways out from the parks, but they'd like to have an option tax so that they can capture a little bit of additional funding for their communities. I'm not opposed to these. MACO's not taken a position on them. The county hasn't officially taken a position, but they're important bills too. So I know we're running really late here, so just keep these in mind.
The question I have is, could you both succinctly send us, you know, what the bill is, whom we should contact, how to contact that person, because that's the only way people are gonna do it, is if we make it really easy for them. We can do a general thing that says, call 406-444-4800, take the link to where they can find their particular representative, but if we can send out something, maybe 3 or 4 bills for each, that if we get a list this long, people won't do it. But 3 or 4 bills for each, the city and the county, and then we can get those out.
I'll probably do the 2 immunization bills, guys, and the 2 clean indoor air act bills.
Especially if there are key legislators. That what I was always uncertain to me is, yes, I can contact my legislator, but I'd sort of like to know the way these blocks happen. If people know who should really be targeted, that is a thing that I would like to know.
Right, and one thing to know is when you call the switchboard, and those people are so friendly and so kind and helpful, you can contact up to 5 legislators, but only 1 committee. Unless you catch somebody in the morning and say, oh, no, I'm really not very busy, go ahead with the committees. But 1 committee, 5 legislators, well, it takes you 15 seconds. I mean, it's really, really quick. But if you know the email address for your particular legislator, that's even better.
Well, and I will tell you, we went through that online last week. I've been contacting legislators who are not from Cascade County on these bills. And all you have to do is go online and ask what committee it's going to be. If you go to the bill, you can click right to the committee. It will list every single member of the committee. And then you can click on their name and it'll hot link you right to their email address. And so, I mean, some of these I am sending to people, I have no idea who they are. Mary Ann Dunwell out of Helena, she responds right back to me and says, I'll vote against this for you, Jane.
Mary Ann is really good.
Diane Sands over in Missoula. Some of these people don't have a clue who I am, but I will send it to every one of them. Now, I will tell you that the immunization and the Clean Indoor Air Act, both of those have become partisan. I get no response back from any Republican. Although I did when I sent Russ Temple, just like I did Wendy McCamey, I sent him an email and thanked him too, and Russ responded right back to me and said, you bet, I think it was a bad bill. So there are some Republicans, but not many, that are voting against these.
Have I frightened you enough?
Please take my handout because it tells you what committee is coming up next and lets you know.
Well, thank you very much, both of you.